Christmas is the season of goodwill, or so we thought. Conservative pockets of America would argue that Christmas is now a battleground where the Christian traditions of the holidays are under threat. It is, in the words of Fox News anchor Bill O'Reilly, a war on Christmas. So, in this episode, we discuss what exactly is being fought. Will this war ever be won? And what even is the war on Christmas? Welcome to America, a history podcast. I'm Liam Heffernan, and every week we answer a different question to understand the people, the places, and the events that make the USA what it is today. To help me answer this question, who else but Dr. Emma Long, Associate Professor of American History and Politics and Head of the Department of American Studies at the University of East Anglia. Emma, welcome back.
Hi Liam, good to see you.
Yeah, you too. And I know this is quite arbitrary because we're recording this before Christmas, but I'm going to ask because this is going out on Boxing Day. How was your Christmas?
My Christmas was great. Thank you very much. I'm going to presume that all the plans that I've got actually happen and everything comes off. And I had a really lovely time. Thank you. I hope you did too, and that everybody listening did as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean, we're not working. That's the main thing, and people get to enjoy this lovely podcast on their Boxing Day, which I'm not sure quite how much enjoyment they're going to get out of this subject. But either way, we're going to dive into it. So you approached me a while ago and told me about this war on Christmas. What exactly is it?
Yeah, it seems strange, doesn't it? War on Christmas. If you follow American politics, people will be aware of this because it sort of comes up every year. Ironically, it's been quieter this year, but pretty much every year there's this battle about the war on Christmas. It's often driven by Fox News and sort of by conservative commentators in the US, but it's sort of this idea that somehow Christmas in the United States is under threat, that it's being targeted by atheists and secularists and people who just don't like Christians and Christmas, right? And they point to things like shops saying, or people working in shops saying happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas or Happy Christmas.
Hmm.
Or people might remember there was a big furor a few years ago over Starbucks cups that didn't have a Christmassy enough design for around the holiday season for them. And you see things like debates over nativity scenes in public places and whether a Christmas tree can be called a Christmas tree or has to be called something else, whether you can sing carols. And the really funny thing about this is that if you do a term search for the war on Christmas, you find absolutely nothing before about 2004. Just nothing turns up. You get all these random articles about Christmas, which is kind of fun, but not what you're looking for. But in 2004, Bill O'Reilly, one of the anchors on Fox News channel, started running this segment on his program called Christmas Under Siege, and he would highlight all of these things that we just talked about and sort of spun this narrative that Christmas in the United States, this enormous juggernaut of a secular and religious holiday that just dominates in the same way that it does here for at least a month before the end of December, that it was somehow under threat from people. And then in 2005, another Fox News host, John Gibson, wrote a book called The War on Christmas. And if you read it, it is very much like diving into the American conservative worldview of things. It's a really interesting way of seeing the way that they interpret these things. And of course, Fox News promoted it and it became a big bestseller. And then the liberal media kind of responded to whether this really was a thing. And now every year it becomes a thing. There's clearly, Christmas is clearly not under threat in the United States, right? In the same way that Christmas is not under threat in the UK. But there's a tendency, I think, because of that, for people to dismiss this battle about the war on Christmas, right, as about political posturing or ideological posturing or something that shouldn't be taken seriously. And actually, I think it's a sign of a bigger debate that are going on in the United States, right, about religion in public spaces and the
Mm,
place of Christianity in a diversifying culture and those kinds of things. So actually, I tend to think it's a much more important debate than some people think, even though you might look at some of the individual instances, like whether a public library can have a Christmas tree or whether your
mm,
local school can decorate the classrooms with red and green colours. They might seem individually quite silly, but or perhaps an overreaction, but actually
mm.
it's a symptom of a much bigger debate in American politics.
But I think Republicans kind of shoot themselves in the foot a bit because I think that we're obviously a left leaning podcast. I don't think there's really been much secret about that, but I think it's safe to say that Republicans declare war on pretty much anything and everything that moves. Right? If it's not a war on Christmas, it's a war on something else. And DeSantis has been declaring war on Disney. That's the latest one. It's the war on woke, the war everything. If it's not Republican, they're at war with it. So why should we take it seriously? And what is this really about?
Yeah, I mean the language of war is important actually in and of itself, right? Because the people who claim the language of warfare are effectively trying to claim the higher ground and saying somebody's waging war on us. We're just defending ourselves. We're under attack, and that's, if you like, that has been the Republican modus operandi for a really long time. And actually, if we're looking at Christmas specifically, it's very much been the approach to culture wars issues by religious conservatives since the 1980s. So it's not new, right? You've got decades going on here, and that language is important.
Hmm,
Um, so yeah, but I take your point. There's a risk that it just seems like the one of a whole range of things, and this sort of the use of this kind of language that you can dismiss. And on one hand, yeah, actually, it's less a war on Christmas than a war about Christmas,
hmm,
right? I think is probably the way of saying it. But there are a couple of bigger issues, right, underlying what's going on here that are part of much bigger debates in American politics and things that we've touched on in this podcast before, right, in other issues. And one is the place of religion in American public life. The US doesn't have an established church like unlike many countries across Western Europe. But as we know, religion plays a big part in American political and social life. So you've got a tension there. And although people talk about the separation of church and state in the US, that's not exactly what the wording is. And the wording's much more complicated. So the legal principles about the place of religion in American politics has been a very, very long debate. It's been to the Supreme Court in multiple forms. It plays out in Congress and at state level. And so, of course, Christmas as a religious holiday, as probably the dominant religious holiday in a country that has historically been dominated by Christians, becomes a focal point for it. But it's not the only one that's been going on. I could point you to lots of other similar debates that have been going on all year along. The second issue is really about inclusivity, I suppose, might be a way of thinking about it. So the US historically, like I said, has been dominated by Christians, specifically Protestant Christians. They have been the numerical majority for several centuries at this point. And of course that means that they've shaped the way society is, the way government works, and all of those kinds of things. And from the 1960s onwards with the civil rights movement and all the other rights movements that kind of came out of that, one of the things that they did sort of forced Americans to think more carefully about the place of minorities in a majority culture and the impact that some of those things could have, and to be more aware of it. And we in modern liberal democracies we talk about tolerance and acceptance and making people feel included and all the rest of it. So there's a real debate about, in a country like the US, which is massively religiously diverse and increasingly religiously diverse, what do you do about Christmas, right? Because on one hand it's a deeply religious holiday, right? It's fundamental to Christianity. Without it you don't really have Christianity. It's sort of the starting point. But for many people, Christmas has become more of a secular holiday. So, can you celebrate the secular without endorsing the religious? How do you find that balance, and what does that mean for people whose faith or lack of faith means Christmas isn't a thing? So, I think the reason that it's important, the deeper debates, are because it's about those bigger issues, not necessarily because I think that we should go to war over a Christmas tree.
Okay, I'm going to make an assumption here, which is that the people who are most vocal about the religious roots of Christmas being sort of taken away or lost or watered down in any way at all are probably also the same people that take their kids to see Santa Claus, that eat mince pies, that enjoy a big turkey feast, that watch Christmas TV, and do all of these things that are really like completely separate from the fact that Christmas is a religious holiday. They embrace the commerciality of it as much as anyone else. So why does it matter?
Um, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you can, if you go to things like, go to Trump's website, for example. Trump has spent several years since he got elected saying that he managed to make it possible for Americans to say Happy Christmas again, as if somehow it wasn't possible before. You go to his website, they've got Christmas decorations, or you go to Fox News and they've got Christmas decorations, right? So they're cashing in on this. And
Hmm.
equally, some of those who have been loudest in these battles have ultimately combined sort of attacks on events that have dealt with secular aspects of Christmas, like Santa or Christmas trees or Christmas presents or reindeer or all of those kinds of things. They've sort of muddled those up with religious symbols
Hmm.
like a nativity scene, for example, or the singing of religious Christmas carols. So it doesn't, in a way, help their cause if part of what they're arguing, and they often do, is that the war on Christmas is an attack on Christians, an attack on Christianity. When they then start complaining about secular symbols, there's a risk that it undermines the argument, right?
Hmm. And to think about this and to think about the what the real argument is, because yeah, I think there is probably an undermining there of the real cause, which probably is a concern around the to an extent the freedom of expression, the ability for some Christians to celebrate Christmas in the way it was intended, and with that is they maybe feel that when they go to the shops and they're not wished a Merry Christmas, instead they're wished Happy Holidays. That they feel in some ways that their celebration is being undermined. That when they take their children to school and it's no longer the nativity play, it's a more general, inclusive, you know holiday performance, that they again feel that Christmas is being undermined. And it may not be a religious country, officially, but America is a very religious country. And a lot of the social and cultural roots of America are based in Christian ideology. So, is there an argument there to say that, well, actually, if a school wants to put on a nativity play, they should be able to put on a nativity play?
It's complicated, isn't it? Because there is that sense that if something's always been done a particular way and suddenly you say, well, actually, you can't do that anymore, does that make people feel like they're being left out? And one of the things that you hear a lot from the religious conservatives who are part of this is, well, my school, library, public space, whatever, celebrates, we celebrate Hanukkah, we celebrate Kwanzaa, we celebrate Diwali, we celebrate all of these things, and why are we now restricting the celebration of Christmas, right? Now, part of that is because some of those making those arguments, not all, but some of them see access to rights as like a zero sum game, right?
Mm.
There's only so much to go around, and if you give some to somebody else, you lose some, which is not necessarily the way that everybody thinks about access to rights and freedom of expression, right? Um, and it is kind of often representative of a, if you like, a Christian centric view of the world, which is we've always done it this way, but we've already always done it this way because Christians have dominated and not thought about religious minorities who don't celebrate Christmas, right?
Mm.
Suddenly we're just becoming more aware of those kinds of things. But there's a bigger issue in the US about the meaning of the First Amendment. I know I always have a tendency to bring these things back to the US Constitution because that's my area of interest. But here it does become relevant. The US, the First Amendment very clearly says that the US doesn't have an established church, and the government can't make laws respecting an establishment of religion. Now, put to one side the vagaries of that particular wording and look at the specifics of the way it's been interpreted. And effectively, it means, or the way the Supreme Court has looked at that, is to say the the government, which is what the Constitution governs, can't favor one religion over another, and can't sort of favor religion over non-religion. So how do you find a balance for, when you suddenly realize, well, yeah, okay, what the celebration of Christmas wasn't problematic in the past because everybody had just assumed that the people who didn't celebrate Christmas actually weren't that important in the grand scheme of the way
Mm.
that society was set up. And now we recognize actually that minority groups are important and we do need to include them. What do
Mm.
we do about Christmas? And how do we recognize, again, the secular, oh, not we, the US? How does the US recognize the secular aspects of that holiday, which it can legitimately do legally without seemingly endorsing the religious ones?
Mm.
And the Supreme Court has not really helped on this. There's a series of cases that are just get a little bit confusing along the way, that don't sort of clearly say yes you can do this, no you can't. The most famous one is a case from the early 1980s called Lynch versus Donnelly, which is often referred to as the plastic reindeer rule. um, and it came about because the city of Pawtucket in Rhode Island had a Christmas display, like on a public park, so owned by the government, and it had a Santa house and reindeer and Christmas presents and season's greetings, but it also had a nativity scene. And there was a challenge to that, and said, well, the government can't sponsor a nativity scene because that's religious. Everything else is fine, but you can't put a nativity scene there because that's fundamental to Christianity. And the Supreme Court, rather than saying yes, you can, or no, you can't, basically came back and said, well, it sort of depends on the circumstances. Um, in that, because it wasn't a religious symbol in and of itself, because it was there with secular elements of the holiday season, they sort of said, well, the government's just recognizing that Christianity is part of a bigger celebration, so it's okay. So of course critics of it came to say, well, you can have a religious symbol so long as you've got plastic reindeer next door to it. But of course it's not much of a guide for people about where you draw the line between what's legal and what's not. And
Yeah.
also there's a difference between legality and how people feel about it. If
Yeah.
your local city has always displayed a nativity scene and someone says you can't do that, then you probably are going to feel aggrieved. But at the same time, you may have a significant population of your town who've always been a bit upset by that, but didn't feel like
Yeah.
they could speak out about it. So,
Yeah.
people often feel strongly.
But I think, this is what it comes down to. It's not really a legal issue because, as you've kind of just demonstrated, people have the right to celebrate Christmas in whatever way they feel they want to celebrate it. I think it's more of a social issue. I think I wonder how much of this as well sort of ties into this kind of Islamophobia that cropped up after 9/11, and this sort of this fear of like outside cultural and religious influence, because you said Bill O'Reilly really coined this in 2004, which is at the height of that
Yeah.
sort of paranoia. And I feel like Republicans especially almost see this as a bit of a game of like top trumps, in that as you sort of alluded to, is that, the more cards someone else have, the less cards you have, and the goal is to kind of you know cancel it all together and have all the cards, which is a terrible analogy, but hopefully you know what I'm getting at. And I do think that when you said that a quality in religion, when you were explaining that far more eloquently a few minutes ago, I think that when all of this was kind of created and the infrastructure for America was sort of founded, I think that equality only really existed in religion so far as, one denomination of Christianity to the other, rather than, to non-Christian, non-Catholic religions. And I mean, that's purely my opinion. But I do think that this whole war on Christmas kind of stems from this sort of deep-rooted Islamophobia.
I suspect there's some of that there. And I mean, if you look at some of the bigger battles that some of the groups who are most vocal in the sort of the idea of the war on Christmas, if you look at some of the other battles that they're fighting in other areas of American life, that would support some of that sense that you know Christians are, and particularly Protestant Christians, we should be clear about this, sort of at least historically, massive tensions in the US between Protestants and Catholics that have become sort of subsumed in recent years, but we should probably note is actually relatively new in American history. Um, but um, that idea somehow that they're losing out, they're being displaced by all these other people, define other as you will,
Mm,
um is it's definitely part of that rhetoric. I wouldn't say it's the position of everybody who's involved in that, but I don't
mm,
think you can ignore the fact that it's very much part of that argument, and it fits into bigger debates about Christian nationalism, and is America a Christian nation, and what that means for people. And you also have to remember, your point just then about it's not so much a legal debate as a social one. Many conservative religious people, and secular conservatives actually would argue that there should be more religion in public spaces. Right? America historically is a Christian nation, would be their argument, and that America is only effective and strong when it's guided by religious principles. And those who oppose that tend to are not anti-religion in most cases. Right? They're people who say no, faith is important, it's a big part of society. This group includes a lot of liberal religious groups, but their position tends to be that religion is a private matter, that it's not for the government or for public spaces to get involved in it, but religion is between you and your deity, or however that's
mm,
defined, or what you do in your private spaces. That no matter what the courts say about the Constitution, um it doesn't stop you as an individual celebrating Christmas or not celebrating Christmas in your
yeah,
house however you want to, or with your friends. And happy holidays is a recognition of the fact that people are doing lots of different things
yeah.
at this time of year, and might just be enjoying the fact that you might get some time off work, right?
I guess I have a question here in that I think we've naturally gravitated towards this kind of the conversations around religion in America, and there's definitely a lot to unpack there that will probably fill a few more podcast episodes in the future as well. But is this really, when you look at how this sort of war on Christmas is being leveraged by Republicans and in kind of political discourse, and you mentioned the Trump campaign as well, how they're sort of uh, tagging on to this. Is it being spun into a threat against Americanism and what it is to celebrate Christmas in America and to be an American at Christmas?
Yeah, I think for some people it really is that, because they see the United States and Americanism so deeply connected up with, if not Christianity, then at least what often gets referred to as the Judeo Christian tradition, which of course is a term that comes out of the Cold War era, which is where a lot of the roots of some of this lie, from the 1940s and 1950s and 1960s. So yes, I agree. I think that there are, for some, and this is a large group of people, so maybe trying I'm trying really hard not to generalize about everybody, right? Um, but yeah, I think for a significant group, it's absolutely that they see the United States in a particular way, and Christmas is just one symbol of what they see as the loss of quote unquote traditional America. I mean, it's sort of a part of Trump's "Make America Great Again" rhetoric, right? For some, America was great when it was unquestionably Christian. So there's definitely some of that going on here, within those who are trying to fight these battles. And I think also you made a really good point about sort of the leveraging of it for political gain, right? I think there are some people within this group who genuinely would argue it from a faith position, right? Who feel like their faith is under threat, whether you or I would see it that way. They feel like that's the case. And then then there's Fox News, right? And people like them, and some within the Republican Party who have absolutely leveraged this issue to make bigger political points about everything from budget decisions to LGBTQ plus rights. Right. So there's definitely a weaponization of religion, which is definitely a bigger debate than we've got time for right now. But that kind of, yeah, taking that on to use it as a headline to
Mm,
make a bigger point about the United States and the way society is changing. There's definitely elements of that that we see in a whole range of issues.
yeah, and if there's one thing you can't fault Fox News for, it's knowing how to create a good headline, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, think about it. The war on Christmas, right?
Yeah.
It's you know polls consistently say that even for people who don't celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday or don't celebrate it at all, in the United States, they have absolutely no problem with Christmas in the way that it's celebrated in the US. Some people
Yeah.
sort of say, well, occasionally it makes me feel a bit isolated, but most people are kind of like, they've always celebrated Christmas here. It's part of the landscape. We don't have a problem with it. All we'd like is people to recognize that we're here too.
Mm,
So there isn't it's not like this kind of secretive shadowy cabal of non-Christians and atheists and secularists and heaven forbid communists, right? Coming together to marshal an attack on the celebration of a Christian holiday. But if you use the rhetoric of it, it immediately creates a sort of us and them situation.
yeah.
And it creates a situation where it seems like that's happening. I mean, if you read John Gibson's book, um, there are times when, I mean, certainly for me, I looked at it and it's like, I'm through the looking glass here. It's like, how on earth would you say that that is an attack on Christianity? Maybe it's
Mm,
someone being perhaps a little bit oversensitive,
mm,
but yeah, it's an interesting read from that point of view, and definitely not one I sort of subscribe to.
Yeah, and I do think that there is an element of anything that kind of contradicts Republican viewpoints is kind of weaponized, and turned into a war on something. And I do think that that can, unfairly reflect on the majority of religious Americans who are quite ambivalent and are actually very open about accepting other cultures and viewpoints and religions into America. Uh, Again, it comes down to the minority really spoiling it for the majority, right?
Yeah, it's a very loud but not very large minority of people who are talking about the war on Christmas.
Mm,
And yeah, I think there are a lot of people who would identify themselves as, even as sort of evangelical Christians who and conservative Catholics who have been the most vocal on this, who would say they don't subscribe to it either. And certainly liberals, you talk to sort of liberals, secular or religious, and they're like, it's a big fuss over nothing. But I think there's a danger in dismissing it quite that way, just as there's a danger of taking it too seriously.
mm,
So yeah, I think one of the reasons I'm absolutely fascinated by this when it comes up every year is just that it's so symptomatic of so many other things
mm,
in US politics and social and cultural life, that it just becomes writ large this time of year, in a way that, because people feel quite strongly about Christmas, sort of the emotionalism, I guess, of it,
mm.
um, tends to heighten people's sentiment about it.
Yeah, and I think as well we do tend, as a world, to kind of hold up America as a bit of an example of where kind of religion and politics can intersect for the wrong reasons. But is America as unique a case study as we like to think? Because as Brits, we're sitting here and sort of thinking, well, they're a bit of a laughing stock, aren't they, over there? And we do kind of deride them a bit for that, but are we just as bad?
Um, I don't know. I may not be the person to ask particularly about that. I mean, I celebrate. I love Christmas holidays. One of the few times that actually my family manages to get together. But I can't remember the last time it had any religious element to it for us. So I may not be the person to best judge. But I mean, I think some of the politics are very specific to the United States, but I think some of the issues around sort of diversity and inclusivity actually are not explicit to the US. So the
Mm,
UK's had its own debates over the years. I mean, the one that gets trotted out quite regularly, both here and internationally, is crikey. So in the late 1990s, I think, in or near Birmingham, which is why I'm aware of it because I grew up not that far from there, they had this sort of Winterfell festival.
mm,
And it often gets trotted out as, look at this, is an attack on Christmas. They couldn't have a Christmas market or a Christmas display. They had this Winterfell thing. And it's like, it ran for 1 year and they also had a Christmas display. And, it's never happened again since, but it gets trotted out every year. And then
mm,
I think, was it last year, 2022, there was a bit of a local controversy around Loughborough where a group rewrote the lyrics to, I think, God Rest You Merry Gentlemen, to be more gender inclusive, which caused a minor ruckus. Um, Maybe so minor that I'm the only person who knows about it. And other countries have similar things. I mean, Canada has seen some debates about the public celebration of Christmas and whether you
mm,
can have Christmas trees or whether you can sing religious Christmas carols at public events, not private ones, but public ones. Australia has seen some similar debates. And while they don't have the legal issues that the US has, and they don't have the specifics of the Republican Party, for example, in the US, they do have sort of some of the same issues, which is that question of an increasingly religiously diverse society
mm.
in countries that historically have been Christian dominated, and an increasing awareness of the need to be inclusive and how you do that properly. So yes, US does it bigger and louder every year, pretty much every year, but they're not alone in having these discussions and some of these clashes. And I don't think I think those things will continue to come up where these discussions happen.
Mhm. And I guess finally, America love to say that they've never lost a war, but they're very proud of their military record. Are they going to win the war on Christmas?
I don't think it. I think it's gonna. I don't think it's a war that can be won. Let's put it that way. Although, if you look, I think if you look at the amount of money that people spend on Christmas every year, and the decorations that people put up, and the Hallmark movies, and the Christmas TV episodes, and all the rest, you might suggest that the war's already been won. Christmas isn't going anywhere, right? In whatever form you choose to celebrate it or try to ignore it. In the United States, Christmas is not going anywhere. So maybe we should just say that it's Christmas has won.
This episode of America, a history podcast, was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Liam Heffernan. A special thanks to my guest this week, as always, Dr. Emma Long, for her fantastic contributions. And if you want to find out more, do get in touch. Email us hello@podcastsbyliam.com. And lots of work goes into making this show, so if you can leave us a rating and a review wherever you're listening to this, that would be amazing. Next time, I'm joined by author and Disney expert Janet Wasco as we take a closer look at the inner workings of the Mouse House to understand, why does everyone love Disney?